While journeying through the vast and untamed wilderness of this world, I came upon a lonely place where a cave had been hollowed out of the hillside. Weary from my travels, I stepped inside, grateful for the shelter. The air was cool and still, and I soon found a place of quiet where I could rest. My eyes grew heavy, and before long the world around me faded into darkness. But the darkness did not last. I awoke, or seemed to awake, standing in a place utterly unlike the cave I had entered. The ground beneath me was soft and uneven, carpeted in something that swayed gently with every breath of wind. It rustled faintly, like a sea of whispered secrets. All around me, slender golden stalks rose up, their tips bending slightly under the weight of ripening heads. The light of the sun, low and warm, bathed everything in a golden sheen, and the air smelled faintly of dry earth and something sweet, like bread before it's baked. The landscape rolled like waves, and I found myself standing at the crest of a wide hill. Only then did I realize I was in the middle of a great field, an ancient grain field, ripe for harvest, its edges gently melting into the distance like the rim of a dream. At the center of this golden sea stood a man. His clothes hung in tatters, clinging to him like brittle leaves in autumn. His back was bowed under a great burden strapped tightly to his shoulders, the shape of it bulging unnaturally, as though it contained not things, but sorrows. In his hands he held a weathered book, its cover cracked, the spine worn with use. He opened it slowly, reverently, and as he read, a change came over him. His chest began to tremble. Tears welled in his eyes and slipped down his cheeks, and his lips moved with silent struggle, as though he were trying to keep something from bursting forth. But then he could bear it no longer. His voice tore through the quiet like a wounded thing.
"What shall I do?"
he cried, the sound rising like a broken bell across the field. The wind was blowing towards him from the direction of his house, so his voice was lost in its howling. In this state of mind, he turned back toward his house, but decided to try and keep everything to himself as long as he could. He did not want his wife and children to think anything was wrong, but he could not keep it in, because doing so only made him feel worse. Arriving at his house, he opened the door and walked into the living room, where his wife and children immediately warmly greeted him.
Welcome home, Christian. We are so glad to see you. How was your day at work?
She could see that he was obviously bothered by the expression on his face, and so she gently took him by the hand and led him to his chair, thinking he might just be tired after a hard day of work. Christian just sighed and collapsed into his chair exhausted.
That bad, huh? Do you want to talk about it?
I feel like I am falling apart inside, because I have a very heavy and uncomfortable burden weighing me down. Not only that, but I have been reading in this book.
At this, he pulled the book out of his pocket, and showing it to his wife, he said,
Our city is soon going to be burned up with fire from heaven. When this happens, it will not only destroy the city that we are in, but all of us as well. Our only hope is for us to find a way to get out of here, so that we are not destroyed when it happens. We need to start packing right away. There is not a moment to lose.
His family just stood there looking at him wide-eyed, with amazement and terror. They were not looking at him this way, because they actually believed that what he was saying was true, but because they actually thought that he was losing his mind. Christiana, who had been married to Christian now for almost 15 years, was very concerned, but seeing all 4 of her children there, and not wanting to create a bigger scene than needed to be created, she had the idea to get him to his bed. Reaching over and gently grabbing his hand in hers, she reassuringly said,
Honey, I think you need to get some rest. I don't think you are well right now. Let's get you to bed as quickly as possible. Some rest will probably be just the thing you need, and you will feel better in the morning. Here, come with me.
Though Christian knew for a fact in his own mind that his wife was definitely wrong in her position, he did not outwardly let her know that he thought so, because he knew it would bother the children. So he went along with Christiana's kind gesture, but inside he was berating himself and fighting the mental battle of whether he should have made a scene for the good of his children or not. Many times he and Christiana had had their differences, but they did their best not to involve the children while they were disagreeing. They knew the effect that it could have on a person, as they themselves had come from homes where their parents constantly fought in front of them. Walking up the wooden steps to the bedroom was something that Christian had done at least 1,000 times, but this trip up the steps was different than any other. The distance between the steps was the same, but as he put one foot in front of the next, he found that they were much harder to surmount. Christiana supportively spoke,
Honey, here, lean on me.
They continued up the stairs with Christiana helping him up every step. Had Christiana not been by his side in this effort, he probably would have just preferred to fall asleep in his chair by the crackling fireplace below. Reaching the top of the stairs and turning to the left, they walked a few steps to the bedroom door. Opening the door to his room revealed a large window just behind a large king-sized bed, and on either side of the bed a bedstand. Christian set the book that he had been reading in on the bedstand to the right. When it came to sleeping, Christian always slept on the right, and Christiana slept beside him on the left. That was how it had been ever since they had gotten married. She was comfortable with things that way, and she was the type of person that once she decided a thing was the way it was, then that was the way it was. Though she had a very kind and caring character, many times Christian had witnessed the strong will that she had for a woman, and it amazed him. A fire was burning in the fireplace that was on the right wall, which helped keep the house warm. Christian and Christiana had expended long hours of work to build that house together, and had built the house in such a way that it would stay warm during the winter months. Each room had a small fireplace in it to keep the occupants warm. The exterior of the house was made of stone, and the house had wood floors too. As he climbed into bed, he could see the candlelight flickering in front of him, with his wife standing there. The light of the candle did not reveal much of her features, or even her expression, but threw as little light afforded, and using his great ability to determine her mood by her tones, he surmised that it must be one of pity. Setting the candle down on the top of her wooden dresser, she walked over to Christian, turned her hand so the back was facing Christian, gently placed it on his forehead, and said,
Well, your forehead doesn't feel very warm, so you don't seem to have a fever from what I can tell. Hopefully some sleep will do the trick.
After saying this, she gave him a gentle kiss on the forehead, walked back over to the dresser, picked up the candle, and started to leave the room, but stopped to face Christian before leaving. As she did, Christian caught glimpses of her revealed by the firelight and the flickering of the candle. Even after almost 15 years of marriage, she was still very attractive. Her straight brown hair fell gently down to about her shoulders. She was looking at him with a naturally kind expression on her face, and with all the compassion and pity that a mother with 4 children could give. Then she said,
I'll be back up in a couple of hours, as I have to finish getting the sewing done and putting the children to bed. Once I am finished, I will come back up here and we can talk about it some more.
Christian, laid back in his bed, faced the ceiling and after a long sigh said,
That sounds good, honey. I will see you then.
The door in front of him shut, leaving the room only slightly darker, except for the dancing of orange light that painted the room flickering at uneven intervals off the walls and on the beautiful quilt that she had made for themselves. She had made it before their wedding, and it was a constant reminder of her love for him and care. Christian was always glad to be reminded of how much she loved him, and it helped him to be more gentle with her as he pondered those things. Quickly after she left, his mind went back to what he had been reading in his book. He could not help but feel the intense battle between the 2 atmospheres he was in. In a sense, it was almost as if he was being pulled between 2 worlds, and one was competing with the other. In the one world was his family and friends, and all the people of his town. In the other world were the things that were talked about in the book. One world was going to get him, and he did not know which. But one thing he knew, and he knew well, was that the one that he had been reading in his book seemed to have much more pull than the one he now lived in. He felt drawn to this book, and he did not want to resist. He knew that continuing to read it and believe what it said would mean big changes in his life, especially if he could not convince his wife of the truth about what he was reading. Christian's stomach started to churn as he thought,
Why must it be this way, though? Why should I have to try and explain this to my wife? We've been married now for almost 15 years, and happily married at that. We've always gotten along in the past. Why can't she understand what I am saying and see that I'm not sick, but that what I am saying is real? She always believed what I had to say in the past, but why the difference now?
The minutes slowly passed, and time seemed to be at almost a standstill. Minutes seemed like hours, and hours seemed like days. All the while, Christian just knew inside that he had to convince his wife of the seriousness of the situation. He tried looking at the problem from all angles, and continued to think. Finally, the sound of the children had ceased, and the fire had burned down quite a bit. So much so that Christian had to get out of bed and grab a couple of logs that were to the right of the fireplace and place them into the fire. Picking 2 of them up off the stack, he gently placed them into the hot coals. Then he grabbed another 2 logs and placed them into the fire that was now starting to stir to life, sending more light into the room. In his mind, he wanted the room to be as bright and cheery as possible, even though it was night, so that there would be a peaceful atmosphere in the room. His work done, he briskly slid his hands together to brush off the excess wood splinters, and then made his way back to his bed. Getting back under the covers, he laid back down, but found himself taking the bedspread half off and letting one of his legs sit on top of the quilt and one under it. His efforts to stoke up the fire had worked, but a little too well. He had not counted on the increased amount of heat from the fire. He laid there for another 15 minutes or so, when he saw the door in front of their bed slowly begin to open, and that familiar small light from Christiana's candle illuminate the dark doorway like a star in the dark night sky. She stepped into the room, looking and sounding a little exhausted, and said,
Are you feeling a little better, honey?
She was hoping that he had gotten some sense into his head at this point, but was quickly disappointed by Christian's response.
No, I'm feeling worse.
Now getting a little worried, she decided to help him see how what he was saying was affecting the rest of the family. She walked over to the dresser and set her candle down on it as she did so. She spoke.
I finally got the children to go to bed. For the most part, they all went to bed rather quickly. Except James, of course. As usual, he had a lot to talk about. That wasn't what worried me, though, Christian. It was what he had to say that really concerned me. He kept asking me about you, and if everything was all right. He asked, "Is Daddy okay? Why does he think our city is going to be destroyed? Is it going to be destroyed?" Then he said, "If we're in the city, won't we be destroyed too? He's only a young child, Christian. He's not supposed to have this kind of nonsense on his mind. You are poisoning our son with this. Why don't you stop and think about what it's doing to him and not just you? He really looks up to you, Christian. You are his example. Be the right kind, not just for him, but for this whole family and for yourself."
Walking just a couple feet in front of their bed, she stopped in front of the side of the bed where Christian was laying, and just stood there, like a statue, with her hands on her hips for a few moments. Her eyes found Christian's, and she stared hard into them. At this point, she walked over to the fire and just stared deeply into it, as if a million miles from the room, and continued.
You aren't the first one to find it, you know, and many people have disappeared after reading it.
At this response, Christian was taken aback. He was not expecting this from his sympathetic and loving wife. He thought to himself,
If this is a fairy tale, then why the harsh response from the people of our town? How could a fairy tale hurt anyone?
And then he thought,
Maybe she is just ignorant about the whole thing. She just doesn't know enough about the book and is merely going by what other people say about it. But I can be a voice in favor of it, and maybe convince her that it is true, and maybe I could even convince her to read it herself.
Christian was jolted back into the moment as his wife impatiently asked,
Well, Christian, are you going to let it go, or aren't you? Or are you just going to keep staring off into space and ignore what I just said?
At this, he responded,
No, I cannot. Do you think that I'm believing this for fun? Don't you think I realize what has happened to those who have read the book and the angry response from the town towards them? I'm not in the dark on this, Christiana. I hear the reports from people at work and in town about these things happening at least once every couple of weeks or so. Yet, if the things that this book says are true, it will mean the end of all of us if we don't follow what the book says. Fairy tale, my love? If this were just some fairy tale, then why the harsh response from the town towards those who read it? Why are they going out of their way to try and keep us from reading it? I've been reading it for several weeks now, and I can tell you from my own experience that this is not just some silly fairy tale. I believe this book holds the truth about our world, where it has been and where it is heading. This is not just some fairy tale to me. To me, this is a life and death matter. Christiana, my love, please let me tell you more about what I have been reading. If that doesn't work, then let me share the book with you, and you can read it for yourself. I know you will understand once you hear more about it. Just...
Hearing this, Christian's eyes lowered, and his hope was crashed against the rocks of her angry tone and voice. He knew inside that he had to make a decision at this point. Christiana was not one to argue with, and any attempt at reasoning when she had made up her mind only would lead to more argument. Christian was trying to distance himself from where he had been raised, and quickly decided that it would be best to let Christiana sleep on it, and said,
Okay, Christiana, I will put the book down for the night, and not read it or discuss it with you, but I'm not going to get rid of the book. We both have freedom of choice, and I'm choosing to believe that the things it says are true."
At this, Christiana's arms dropped down to her sides. She was exhausted and tired and knew it was getting late. Knowing that any further arguing at this point would not get anywhere, and secretly hoping that he would be better in the morning, she said,
"All right, Christian."
There was a pause, and then she walked over to her dresser, pulled open the top cherrywood drawer, grabbed her red flannel nightgown, and set it on her side of the bed. After this, she sat down on the bed, undressed, and began putting on her nightgown. Once she had put her head through the top hole of the nightgown and was dressed, she sighed deeply and said,
"I will agree to that."
Then, climbing into bed and pulling the covers over her, but putting a little distance between her and Christian, she said,
"But I don't want to hear you talking to me about it anymore, and you'd better be better by morning. If I find that you are not, I'm calling the doctor and going to get other people involved. This is serious, and you need some serious help, Christian. I will do what it takes to get you to stop talking about it. That book needs to go."
Having said all this, Christiana thought to herself,
Maybe I was a little harsh with him. He just needs to see that this whole idea is dangerous and just nonsense, and the sooner he realizes it, the better.
Turning to face him in the bed and putting her arm around him, she said in a slightly pleading tone,
It's not real. Christian, you need to come to realize that. All of this fire and destruction stuff is not real. Anyways, let's get some sleep.
After saying this, she turned her back towards Christian, laid on her side, and soon there was silence. Christian, meanwhile, decided that it would be best to sleep on his back that night and face the ceiling. Normally he slept on his stomach, but tonight was different. There were 2 reasons for this decision. The first was because he did not want to face her back, as this made the rejection he was feeling all the more painful, and the second was because the fire seemed to provide some solace and distraction from the terrible situation. Christian found himself staring up at the flickering orange ceiling. An orange light that was coming from the fireplace seemed to play and flicker with the shadows on the ceiling, making quick advances into the darkness, and then retreating back towards the fireplace. This pattern continued again and again. As Christian watched the dance of the light, he was reminded of the war that was going on in his own heart between light and darkness. Behind Christian was the large window, and had he chosen to, he could have gone outside, looked up, and been greeted by the thousands and thousands of shining points of light that were hugged by dark patches of night sky, with that large oak tree to the right, as he had done on many other nights with his family. But it was late, and the house was silent aside from the light breathing coming from Christiana's form under the blankets next to him. That night was a particularly chilly one, though there was not any frost on the window, as the depths of fall had not yet quite arrived. After a few more minutes, Christian heard Christiana's light snoring as she had drifted off to sleep. He knew that he was all alone in the room. The only thing he could hear now was the crackling fireplace and the gentle sound of the slightly muted crickets outside. And yet, strangely, even though Christian felt some isolation, it was not as bad as his anxious mind had told him it would be. As he stared into the fire, he thought,
Surely the king who wrote this book and warned of a coming destruction had to care about those he was writing to. After all, he spends much time in many passages warning people.
But No sooner had Christian's mind said the word destruction than he once again found himself thinking about his wife and children. He did not know how long it would be until his city was destroyed, but knew it must be soon, the way things were going. Suddenly, he found himself reciting the words of Luke chapter 17, verses 26 through 30 in his mind.
And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came, and destroyed them all. Likewise also as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed.
He felt almost certain that the day of his city's destruction would be the next morning. Try as he might, he just could not seem to get to sleep. There was just too much at stake. His mind went from that terrible destruction back to his wife and children and himself. They were all connected to this. This was not just some fairy tale like he had read in other books. There was serious truth to the book he was reading, and whether he wanted to admit it or not, it affected him and everyone around him. Even if he were to get away, what of them? He would certainly mourn the loss of their company, but eventually they would get along without him. But their lives would all be short-lived, as destruction was soon to be upon them. He had to at least attempt to get their attention. Maybe he could. And then he paused, looked away from the fire, and back towards the gently sleeping form next to him. A single glance towards his wife immediately blotted any resolve out of his mind. She had told him that she did not want to hear any more about it. The constant struggle of knowing that what he believed was true, and that he could not convince his wife, brought tears to his eyes. He began to sob deeply. Never had he felt so alone, and so cut off from human companionship. There, right beside him, sleeping, was the one he had chosen to spend the rest of his life with. At this, memory after memory of all the things they had shared together, and things they had done together, all seemed to dance by him in a parade, with each one seeming to cruelly shout, "Never again," as it went by. What could he do now but try and sleep? Time passed slowly, but Christian could not get to sleep no matter how hard he tried. The minutes turned into hours, and pretty soon the fire had burned down to coals, and a dull light began to slowly creep into the room. The morning had come, whether he had wanted it to or not. By this time, Christian was trying to come up with any solution he could to convince his wife that what he had said was real. Not only his life, but their lives depended on the success of this venture. By this time, Christiana's snoring had ceased. She soon stirred, and then slowly turned back around to face Christian. Reaching her arm gently towards him, and lightly and affectionately placing her hand on his shoulder, and hoping against hope that it was all over, she spoke.
Honey, how are you feeling this morning? Do you feel better?
Christian knew that he had to answer her. He tried to quickly shut off the tears that had been falling that night, and to unnoticeably wipe them away with his hands. But it was no use. The red in his eyes could not be hidden, nor the tearful quiver in his voice that had resulted in the long night of crying. As Christian rolled over and turned around to face Christiana, she immediately noticed his red eyes, and the wetness of them, and the dark circles around them. As he spoke, His voice trembled and cracked from the exhaustion he felt.
I feel worse than I did last night about this. If you would just give me a chance to explain more to you. I don't feel like you are giving this a chance, and I fear for the safety of you and the children. Christiana.
At this point, Christiana abruptly drew back and silently paused, looking at him with utter frustration, threw the covers off of her, got out of bed, quickly got dressed, and without saying a single word more, left the room, slamming the door. The room was no more painted by the cheery fire, but now a cold light blue had taken over the room. This only added to the feelings of loneliness that Christian had been feeling. The silence was deadening, and the shutting of the door only amplified the reality in Christian's heart that their marriage and family were in serious trouble over this. He felt all alone again, but this time there was an additional burden. Not only was the difficulty not solved between the two of them, but now all of his efforts to save his wife and children would have to be put on pause, because he had to leave her and the children to go to work knowing that she did not agree with what he was doing and thinking. This would have to be left in the open and dropped for the rest of the day till he got back home, and who knows what might happen while he was at work. Christian struggled with the reality that, like it or not, he had a family to provide for, and going to work was part of that. Even if they somehow managed to continue to live together, what if Christiana and the children never came around to seeing things for what they were? Never again would he see the brightness of the sunshine of her smile, or the laughter of his children. But his family would be forever at odds with him. And the joy that he had been experiencing in his heart, they would continually try and avoid and run from. He would have nothing in common with them. It made him sick to think about these things. As he got out of bed, his feet were greeted by the cold wooden floor. Below, he could hear the sound of his wife talking to the children, but could not quite make out exactly what she was saying. Getting dressed, he made his way out of his room, down the hall, and to the stairs. There he stopped for a moment. On the wall in front of the stairs was a painting of him with his wife and children. They were all sitting in a nice wicker couch outside, in front of that large oak tree, together on a beautiful spring day, dressed in fine clothes with natural smiles on their faces. The picture seemed to stare at him and mock him with that happiness that once was his.
That's what I used to enjoy,
Christian thought.
but I might never get that privilege again.
Sighing, he thought to himself,
Will things ever be that way again?
Then, as if to get it out of his mind, he resolutely turned and started walking down the stairs. As he began to descend the stairs to go down to the living room, he could see the fireplace to the right with his wife and children gathered around it talking, and beyond the living room, the kitchen. Their conversation suddenly had ceased as he had come down the stairs. What could he say? There was nothing more to be said, especially not in front of the children. He would not create division in his own home, if it could be helped. He would try another way to reach the children. He glanced up for a brief second at them, but was only greeted by their stares at him. In that glance, he knew what they were thinking. They were thinking that he had lost his mind, and they were perplexed as well as worried about the situation. They had hoped that by getting him some sleep, it might help him calm down, but they had been sorely mistaken. He made his way quickly to the front door, but before he could get it open, his wife stopped him and spoke with a half-pleased, half-mocking tone.
Leaving before you've had your breakfast? What's the hurry?
She paused for a moment to let the intensity build in the room, knowing that the children would not speak.
You were not reading in that book of yours again, were you? Please tell us you were not. Oh no. Maybe all of that nonsense did somehow get stuck up inside of your head.
Again she paused, and in added frustration said,
Well, the children and I have had enough of it. We don't want to hear any more about this doomsday nonsense, or anything else from that book for that matter. You have done nothing but talk about that book lately, and I think it's getting between you and this family. Christian, please stop it with the scary tales already. We are sick and tired of it.
Christian could hardly believe what he was hearing. His own wife had betrayed him, and not only that, but made him look bad to the children in front of them. This was totally unlike her, and he just could not comprehend why all of this was happening. In defense, he said,
But dear, you don't understand. There's more to it than that. Yes, it's true that our city is soon to be destroyed, but there is hope. There is a celestial city that we can escape to and avoid destruction, and the king himself has promised all who will flee to his city safety there. So you see, my dear, no one needs to be lost. The king is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. I have read so in my book, and you can see so for yourself.
In a mocking tone, Christiana replied,
You actually think that there is another place besides the one we are in now? Somewhere that is better than where we are now? And just where is this so-called king you speak of? In a city? Up in the sky? Really, Christian, really? Let me remind you, dear Christian, that we have one of the best houses in the city and you have one of the best jobs. You could wear some of the best clothing around, but what are you wearing right now? Rags! Tattered rags!
Christian did not want to tell Christiana at this point, but all of the nice clothes he had been wearing had turned to rags on their own, ever since he started reading the book. He knew that if he did tell her, she would not believe him anyways, so he just kept it to himself. She continued her attack.
Then on top of all this, you walk around hunched over like you have some invisible burden on your back that no one can see. How do you think that is going to make us look, Christian? What do you think people will think when they see the children and I happy, and you all bent over with misery and wearing rags? Really, Christian, enough is enough. You are making this family look terrible, and are making me look like some terrible wife who doesn't take care of her husband.
After saying this, her tone grew down right cold and dark. She stared at him through angry tears that had begun to slide down her face and said,
The children and I think it would be best if you left and didn't come back until you get your mind off of these things. Also, I've had time to think about it. And I don't think you should bring that book of yours into this house again either. All it is doing is scaring the children and causing confusion for them. I can't believe I'm hearing you say these strange tales. Why don't you just go to work? I'm sure they would love to hear all of this nonsense that you have been telling me.
Then she paused again for a moment and said,
No, wait. Maybe that is not such a good idea after all. We would lose the house and you would be committed. Your work colleagues and managers would not like to hear about it either. So just keep it to yourself and stay at work till you decide to burn that book in your hand.
Christian's heart sank, and turning sadly away from his family, he headed to the living room door to the outside. Opening the door and then closing it behind him, he paused for a moment and just stared out in front of him. He was immediately greeted by the bright, warm morning sunlight on his face, and it was quite refreshing. This, in turn, reminded him of his book, and of the celestial king's words found in Matthew chapter 13, verse 43, which says,
Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear.
With that picture in his mind, he walked down the steps from his house, down the sidewalk, and made his way towards work. As he walked, his mind switched to what would happen at work. Obstinate and Pliable were his working partners, and they were sure to greet him when he arrived. He enjoyed working with them. But one thing was certain: Obstinate was stuck in his ways even more than Christiana herself. And Pliable, well, he was very wishy-washy in his decision-making, and usually chose the easiest road with the least resistance. The least resistance usually amounted to doing whatever Obstinate told him to do or think, because Obstinate was a very forceful person. In fact, Christiana was Obstinate's sister. He was no different than she when it came to how he would respond if Christian tried to share with him what he was reading in his book. A couple of times, Christian had tried to share a couple things he had been reading in his book with Obstinate, but to no avail. Arriving at work, Christian quickly set out for his desk at the accountant's table. But before he could get there, Obstinate spotted him and said,
Christian! It's about time you got here. You are late again. Let's not make a habit of this. You know the boss wouldn't be too pleased if he found out you've been late so much. So, what is keeping you from being at work on time today? More reading in that book, I suppose.
Before Christian could speak a word, Obstinate continued,
You know we here at work are getting tired of hearing about it. You are always trying to be so honest lately, and your honesty is starting to cost this company lots of money. Take the Jameson account, for example. We were going to make an additional $10,000 on that account if you would have just kept silent. You would have lost your job if it had not been for me. Quit rocking the boat and quit reading the book. It's only going to ruin you and this company. I covered for you just yesterday with Mr. Spivens about this, and I stuck my neck out for you. I'm not going to continue to cover for you on these issues. You're going to have to start thinking smarter and stop being so conscientious. Smarter means whatever makes the company more money, because what makes the company more money makes you more money. Save your conscientiousness for another time. We don't need that sort of thing around here.
All the while, Pliable had been listening and had said nothing up to this point. Now he spoke.
Christian, you know Obstinate is right here. If we are going to continue to make more money, you've got to fall in line with the rest of us. Leaving out information from time to time or staying silent can save a lot of unnecessary headaches.
Christian, without saying a word, went to his accounting desk and began working. The day at work seemed to go by quickly, and Christian couldn't get out of there fast enough. By the end of the day, Christian was again on his way back to his house. But this time, he remembered his wife's angry words, and they echoed again and again in his ears.
So just keep it to yourself, and stay at work till you decide to burn that book in your hand.
He had taken her first piece of advice that day, but now the words that he had been reading seemed to have started a fire inside of him that was burning him from the inside out. He just could not keep silent. Christian was drawn to the book and began to read in it again, and he decided that he would not burn the book. Having come to this decision, he knew he must return home, in spite of what his wife said. After all, he had helped build and pay for that house that they were in, and he had just as much right to it as she. Upon entering the house, he was greeted by his children and wife. Christiana was the first to speak.
Welcome home, husband. Have you had a good day at work? Why don't you come over by the fire and sit and tell us all about it?
The children all clamoured for attention, and even the 13-year-old Matthew gave him a hug. The fire was roaring in the background and seemed to call him by name, to come and warm himself up to it. Finding his way into the house, he sat down exhausted into the chair. At this, his wife gently walked over next to his chair and spoke.
I know you've had some time to think about what I've said, and I'm just curious as to whether or not you decided to follow my advice and get rid of that book. I've been thinking about it all day since you've been gone. Christian, you've not been yourself, ever since you've been reading that book. Where is the happy husband that I have known for so long? You look like a dark cloud has settled over you, and that does not help us when we have had difficult days. Oh, Christian, please tell me you've gotten rid of that book.
Gotten rid of it? I can't do that, Christiana. It's too important to me. If you only knew the things that I have been reading in this book. I've been learning so much lately. Did you know, for example, that we are to love our enemies?
As soon as Christian had spoken, Christiana turned to the children and said,
Children, please go upstairs and get ready for bed. Your father and I need to have a talk.
Christian and Christiana had trained their children well to obey instructions and orders, and they were the sort of children that did the best they could to obey their mum and dad. Hearing these words, and knowing that he needed to act, Matthew the eldest spoke.
Okay, everyone, you heard her. Let's get upstairs.
At this, the children gave their father and mother a hug goodnight and went upstairs. Christiana waited till the children had all gone up to their room, and after hearing the faint sound of the door shutting, she walked in front of him and the fire, standing with her arms crossed, and began to speak in a mocking tone.
Love?
At this, she paused for a moment again, and then spoke with a little bit of laughter and scorn.
Our enemies?
Again, she paused to add more effect, and stared deep into Christian's eyes, and then spoke again.
And I suppose that I'm one of those, aren't I, Christian? Me, your own wife, who loves you more than anyone on this earth. You know, Christian, 15 years ago, I chose to marry a man whom I knew I could trust, a man I knew I could share my heart with. But the last day and a half, I feel like I've been married to a perfect stranger. All you seem to care about is that book and what it says. But what about me? What about me, Christian? What are you becoming? You are no longer the man I married.
She shouted.
I can't. I just can't.
She continued staring deeply into his eyes, as hers began to pool up with tears that slid down her cheeks, one after the other, in rapid succession. Hearing these words, Christian felt like his very heart was being pulled apart. His chest hurt, and he ached to heal the hurt in her heart. He wanted to be there for her, but he couldn't give up what he knew to be the truth. Instead, he desperately tried to show her the danger her and the children were in.
No, Christiana, that's simply not true. I love you all very much, and that's why I'm trying to explain and warn you and the children. I want you to escape with me. We can go together. There's no need for us to stay in this situation any longer.
In these words, Christian had attempted with all the care and love he could to convince her and the children to go along, but it was all for nothing. She looked at him unaffected by his statement, narrowed her eyes angrily at him, and responded,
Christian, you truly are not well. In fact, I've already taken the liberty to call the doctor while you were at work today, and he will be here in the morning. Somehow, I just knew you were not over all this. You are going to speak with him. You've got to get help for this problem of yours. There is no sense anymore in trying to continue this path, and I fear that by continuing to listen to your conversations, I am only encouraging you to continue in your mad ravings. You are not my enemy, and I do love you. So I'm not going to speak with you any more about any of this until the doctor gets here and looks at your mental health.
The doctor? I never gave you permission to call him. I'm telling you that I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I've been telling you the truth.
Christiana looked at Christian as if studying him intently, with her arms crossed for what seemed like 2 minutes, during which time she just stared at him, as if he had no right to believe that she would do anything else under the current circumstances. Then, speaking as if she had not heard his last statement, she said,
Yes, Christian. I did call the doctor. You are definitely not well in your head. I thought that sleep might have helped you last night, and just being patient and kind with you. I was hoping that this was just some passing thing for you, but obviously this is not the case. The doctor believes you need some serious help. I just wish I could have convinced you myself without the need for all this. Now, if you will excuse me, I have other things I need to get done, like making sure the children get to bed on time, since you arrived home so late tonight.
At this, Christiana angrily walked away from between him and the view of the large fireplace in front of him, her heavy footsteps showing her obvious irritation and frustration. As she did, Christian stared hard into the fire. His mind was 1,000,000 miles away again, and he remembered some more of what he had read in the book in Matthew chapter 5, verses 44 through 49.
But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you, and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect.
Here was an opportunity for him to put into practice what the king had said, but not one he really wanted to take, for it was not easy, but Christian did find that it offered a little help. He began his prayer thus,
Dear Celestial King, my family has rejected me. They just don't seem to understand the seriousness of the situation. And my wife, my dear wife, she is so angry with me right now. She just doesn't seem to understand. I've tried to help her, but she won't listen. Instead, she thinks that I'm the one who needs the help. It hurts me so badly to see them this way. Please help me convince them.
All through the rest of that evening, no one spoke to Christian. But as the icy waves of rejection and tormenting thoughts sprayed in his ears, threatening to sink him emotionally, he would return to his place of prayer. That being said, Christiana did bring him a bowl of hot tomato soup. She quietly handed the bowl to him, and then just left the room. Sipping his soup, he was again tormented by the war that went on in his mind.
How can you continue to hurt those who love you so much? Look, she gave you soup. Your wife and children really care about you, and all you are doing by reading this book of yours is hurting them. Don't you think it's time to stop? What if they are right and you are wrong?
At this, Christian quickly attempted to get his mind out of the rut and found a way. To do so by continuing to pray for his wife and children. He remembered the words of the king.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
After sitting in front of the fireplace for another hour or so, and continuing to think and pray, Christian could hear the monotonous ticking of the large grandfather clock against the wall. Suddenly, the sound of the chime rang in his ears. The chime happened 9 times, and Christian knew he had better try and get some sleep. He wanted to go up to his room and sleep as he had always done. However, instead of going to his room, he realized he would have to stay in the living room that night. He didn't dare go back to his room and have a repeat of what happened the night previous. Not more than a few steps from the couch to the right was a nice cherry wood cupboard. Inside of that cupboard was a nice quilt that had been made for guests in the home. Christian pulled it out and then proceeded to go back to the chair. Laying back down in the reclining chair, he soon closed his eyes, and everything in the room went dark around him. A welcome sleep greeted him, and he forgot about everything. There was quiet for all but about 10 seconds, and then all was shattered as he was propelled back into alertness by the familiar metallic impact and echo of the grandfather clock that he and his wife had purchased at great expense. After realizing what the sound was, and knowing that things would not change too much, he made another attempt to get back to a much-needed rest. Again, however, his sleep did not last long. Every time he had entered it, he was awakened by the sound of the chiming of the clock that announced another hour had gone by. During such times as this, he would pray for his family and then fall back asleep. Finally, the darkness that had been outside of the kitchen window had turned a dark pale blue, signaling the approaching dawn. The crickets had even stopped chirping, and the sounds of the first morning birds could be heard faintly outside. Realizing the ideal time had come, Christian gathered his things up, gently folded the quilt, and walked toward the cupboard with the folded quilt in hand. Opening the cherrywood cupboard, he quickly and quietly put the quilt back on the second shelf into the cupboard. After closing the cupboard, he walked into the kitchen, grabbed some leftover bread, walked back, picked up his book, and then started to head out the door. But no sooner did he go to open it to leave than he was stopped cold by a knock from the outside. There, looking out the window, he saw a man dressed in a black suit, with a briefcase in one hand. Again he knocked, and Christian opened the door, just in time to hear the hurried footsteps of his wife coming down the stairs. Knowing that his only option was to open the door, he cordially welcomed the doctor in. Before Christian could say anything to the doctor, Christiana spoke.
Welcome, good doctor.
She smiled and then spoke again.
And thank you so much for coming on such short notice. I know that you are a very busy person.
He smiled back, looking at both Christiana and Christian, and said,
Yes, ma'am, you definitely can say that I am busy. I have been very busy lately. Why don't you all come into the living room so we can talk more about what is going on?
Hearing these words, and knowing that her husband seemed to be in the presence of someone who could help him, Christiana stopped following, and said,
Let me go and get us all something to eat.
Then, looking at Christian, as if embarrassed that he would try and get himself food when she was going to make some, she said,
Honey, you don't need to eat just bread. I'm going to fix a nice breakfast of eggs and toast with orange juice to drink. Also, don't worry about the children. I've already explained to them that they are not to come downstairs, and that I will be bringing them breakfast upstairs. You and the good doctor enjoy your conversation.
At this, Christiana turned about face, left the room, and began to busy herself in the kitchen making breakfast. Upon hearing this, Christian seated himself on one of the couches, and the doctor seated himself in Christian's recliner, turning it to face the couch, which was behind it, and setting his briefcase on the ground. The doctor faced Christian and began to speak in a very condescending tone.
So, your wife tells me that you have been having trouble sleeping at night. Would you like to explain what is going on to me?
I've been reading in my book that our city is going to be destroyed by fire, and that we need to get away from the wrath that is to come.
Hearing this, the doctor was taken aback with surprise, almost as much as Christiana, though for a different reason. But instead of mocking, he acted as if Christian didn't quite understand the true cause for his worry, and that he was mistaken. And in that tone, and with a small laugh, he said,
Oh, you mean that worry. Most people have those kind of worries. Christian, it is not caused because there is actually some destruction, but is rather caused by mistaken past traumas in your life. You see, Christian, this is just your subconscious mind trying to fool you. It will make up experiences as a result of your past, trying to escape your fears that were generated in the past by the book in your hands is crazy.
At this, the doctor looked into the kitchen, and with a knowing tone, spoke to Christiana.
Isn't that right, Christiana?
At which the noise of the flipping of an egg in the pan and the setting of plates on the table to be taken up to the children stopped, and from a distance in the other room her voice could be heard saying,
Oh yes, of course it is. I can remember having some of those same fears myself, and he helped me see what was really causing them. Why don't you let him help you, Christian?
Christian, if you don't mind my interrupting, how did you come across this book in the first place?
I found it in the field above my house.
Ah, I seem sure that you did. Did you not know that this book was forbidden in our land countless years ago? Christiana has informed you of this already, I'm sure. In fact, I was the one who counseled her to throw the book away in the first place. This was a couple of years before she met and married you, of course. I helped her understand that the magistrates of the town had forbidden that book for good reason, and dear Christian, I might add, on the recommendation of many counselors like myself.
Hearing this explanation almost convinced Christian, but deep down inside, he knew that this reasoning was not true. Christian then looked at the doctor, and then spoke.
What makes you so sure that you and the other esteemed experts are right, Doctor? I know that you have studied for many years to get to where you are, but was not this book around before you and those who were before you began your studies, and even, in fact, before this university was ever established?
At this, the doctor was a little irritated that his experience and knowledge, and the knowledge of those who went before him, should be questioned. Though this was the case, he subdued it quite well, turned, smiled towards Christian, and said,
To be sure, yes, that's true. But my dear Christian, how can you be sure they didn't all just have the same problem you do, but didn't have a label for it?
As Christian listened to the response, he began to get more confused, until a thought came to his mind. He paused for a minute, as if deep in thought, and then spoke again.
Dear Doctor, from where do you claim to get your authority for making such statements?
In a matter-of-fact tone, the doctor retorted,
Why, from science and the scientific method, of course. I make a hypothesis and then test to see whether it is true through experimentation. Then, from the results of that experimentation, I come to a logical conclusion. Isn't that how everyone does it?
In response, Christian said,
And what makes you think I am any different? However, it is quite clear to me that you are basing your ideas off of your own assumptions, or rather the assumptions of others, and then by testing, you come to your conclusions. Why cannot I then base my assumptions off of the authority of those who have gone before me that are in this book?
Christian held the book up in the air and showed it to the doctor and said with authority,
The authority who commissioned this book is none other than the celestial king himself, who is someday to come back to claim his own, and you, dear sir, make your claims on the authority of another.
The doctor's eyes narrowed at this point, and he said,
You are not safe to be around Christiana, and I can see that you would only hurt her more.
Christiana had just come into the living room to bring the children's breakfast to them as these words were spoken. She went slightly pale, set the dishes upon the coffee table that was in front of the couch, and then stopped and stared hard at Christian, and then looked back at the doctor, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke.
Christian, I don't think the children and I can trust you right now. And I think the doctor is right. We are not going to allow you to stay with us any longer unless you get rid of that book. The idea that you would take the sayings of that book over the authorities that are around us does not make any sense to me. Indeed, it does not seem to make sense to the good doctor here either. He went to school in the highest university in our fair city. In fact, you went there too. So why you would want something other than what you have now, and indeed that the something that you would want would be imaginary, is beyond me.
No sooner had these words come out of her mouth than Christian's head dropped slowly. He stared down at the floor as if to try and get out of there. He keenly felt the rejection that was being heaped upon him from so many angles, and it hurt very deeply. Slowly tears began to form in his eyes, but he did his best to keep anyone from knowing. He had been cut very deep by this exchange. To him it seemed that no one cared any more about him. So, after saying not another word, he walked silently to the door, leaving the doctor and Christiana behind. Slowly, he closed the door behind him and proceeded to leave his house. Cool morning air driven by a breeze greeted him as he walked outside. Christian walked down the porch steps, turned and took in his home for one last glance, and then headed down the sidewalk. As he walked, he could not help but feel the intense sting of the wind in his face, that only seemed to remind him of the intense sting of being thrown out of his own house and alienated from all those who had seemed to care about him only a few days prior. Now he had finally made a complete decision. He would have to go on without his wife and children with him. With each step forward in the new direction, he knew not where he was going. His head was in his book, and he would only glance up occasionally. Somehow, though, he ended up walking off the street that went by his house, and down a small path that led up a hill, that had a large grain field at the top of it. The ripe grain was blowing away from his house in the breeze, and had not yet been harvested. Stepping into the field was something that Christian had done often, and at different seasons. Christian could do this because he had the owner's permission to walk in that field. He would often go there when he did not know what to do, or wanted some time to meditate and get away from the pressures of life. Now he found himself there because he just didn't know what to do or where to go. Again he stared down at his book in his hand, and then looked around. At some point, every person comes to a realization that it does not matter what anyone around them may think of their actions. They are desperate and truly need help. Christian was at this point, and shouting up into the empty blue ceiling of space above him, he said,
"What shall I do?"
Now, Christian did not expect an answer from this, as most would not either, for there did not seem to be anyone around him. He was well off the road and on the top of the hill. This was not a place that people frequented, and that was why he went there so often. He stared back down at his house, and then back to the field of grain. Looking down at his house from this vantage point afforded him a view of his children's bedroom window and the backyard with the tall oak tree that provided much shade on hot summer days. As he looked down at the whole scene, a knot began to form in his throat. It choked its way up, and with it he began to sob deeply, uncontrollably, and then looked back towards the field. Never had he felt so alone in all his life as at this point. Behind him was his old life, full of love and memories, and in front of him. Christian paused and again was gripped by the reality that in front of him was the great unknown. Who would be there for him? All seemed void and empty in front of him. He continued to cry, and now started to shake uncontrollably. Again he began to look back and forth, and shouted out into the open air,
"What shall I do? What shall I do?"
Christian looked back at his house and shouted the same words, knowing that he would get no answer from there. Then, all of a sudden, Christian heard a gentle and caring voice behind him saying,
"What seems to be the problem?"
At this, Christian was very startled. He had thought for sure that he was all alone, and that no one was around. Turning around with his back towards his house, he was met by a muscular and tall man with brown hair, with the kindest eyes he had ever looked into, and dressed in a white tunic, with a leather belt around his waist and a bag of seed that hung with a leather strap from his right shoulder. From the look of him, Christian thought that he must be the farmer who owned the field. He had never actually met him in person, but had gotten permission from some of the workers in the field. They had assured Christian that it was okay for him to be in that field. However, now, seeing the farmer himself standing there, Christian felt very unsure of whether he should be there or not. So, answering the farmer in a somewhat quivering tone, he responded,
"I'm very sorry, sir. I had permission from your servants to visit this field, but I can leave right now if you'd like."
At this the farmer smiled and said,
"Oh, that's okay. You needn't leave here. You are welcome here anytime, Christian."
Christian was a little surprised and said,
"How did you know my name? I've never spoken with you personally."
Then he stopped again for a moment and kind of laughed, saying,
"Oh, you must know me because your servants have told you about me."
"Yes, I do know you, Christian, and that is why I'm wondering what is wrong. Oh, and before we go any further, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Evangelist."
At this, Christian's mind went back through the events that had been transpiring over the last few days. He felt afresh the rejection, the pain and the misery, and felt sure that this man would be just like all the others he had met in the city of destruction. So lowering his eyes to the ground in shame, he said,
"You probably don't want to hear about it. In fact, you may think I'm crazy and losing my mind for saying it. Everyone else seems to think so. My colleagues at work, my friends, and even my wife and children."
Tears began to slowly fall down Christian's face. Evangelist smiled and looked into Christian's eyes and said just 2 words. But once Christian heard them, knew that he would never forget them from that moment on, as long as he lived, he said,
"Try me."
And at that very moment Christian lifted his head to look into the man's eyes. No sooner had their eyes met than Christian thought he was staring into two pools of deepest aqua blue he had ever seen. Never had he seen eyes that spoke so much love and understanding. They seemed to tell the story of his whole life. In fact, they seemed acquainted with everything that he had done, and everything that had happened to him, and then much, much more. Christian felt that he was standing in the presence of one who knew him far better than he had ever, or could ever, or would ever know himself. After what seemed like an eternity of staring, Evangelist spoke.
What seems to be the problem?
Christian, up to this point, had put the book to his side, but now again he realized that he was still holding it. Picking the book back up, he showed it to Evangelist and said,
Do you see this book? This is what is bothering me. I have been reading it, and I have become convinced that our city is soon to be destroyed by fire. The king of the celestial city has decreed it, and I do not want to burn up with it. On top of all this, I have a terrible burden on my back, which no one can see but me, and it is hurting me badly.
Up to this point, Evangelist had been listening intently, but upon hearing that no one could see his burden but Christian, Evangelist spoke up and said,
I can see your burden, and it is a large one indeed, I dare say.
How can you see my burden, and yet no one else around me seems to be able to see it?
Christian, it takes special eyes to see that which is unseen. There are some who can see your burden, but in almost all cases, only those who have borne one in the past, or realize that they themselves currently bear one, can see it.
At this, Evangelist suddenly changed the conversation and asked,
So why don't you want to die? It would be an escape from all of the misery that constantly happens in this life. Don't you want that to stop?
Christian could hardly believe what he was hearing. The one thing he did not want to do was to die. He knew all too well what awaited him when he did: fiery indignation and eternal judgment, and he wanted no part of either of them. Realizing that the person speaking to him might be able to help him more, Christian continued,
I am convinced that this burden on my back will sink me lower than even the grave itself, sir, and then after that I will face judgment and be condemned to eternal death. I do not want that to happen, so I am trying to find a way to escape from this place as quickly as possible.
All the while Christian was talking, Evangelist was looking intently at him. Then Evangelist spoke again.
Well, Christian, if this is the situation that you find yourself in, what are you doing standing here?
The realization that he truly cared about what Christian was going through was an indescribable comfort to Christian. After Christian had left off talking, Evangelist reached into his satchel that had seed in it and pulled out a rolled-up parchment scroll and proceeded to hand it to Christian. At which point, Christian carefully unrolled it and expected to be in for a long read. But when he put his eyes on it to read, he noticed that there were only a few words, but they were written in very large gold letters that seemed to sparkle on the page, and they said, Flee from the wrath that is to come. Rolling the scroll back up, and then handing it carefully back to Evangelist, Christian stared hard into Evangelist's eyes, and then spoke again.
Yes, I know that I am supposed to run.
At this, Christian looked down at the ground, and then looked back into the eyes of Evangelist and said,
Where am I to run to? I don't know where to go.
From below down the hill, Christian could suddenly hear the noise of his children, and wife beginning to mention him.
There he is, Doctor, standing in that grain field. He has been doing this for the past few weeks now, ever since he started reading that book. We have to stop him before he loses his mind.
The very mention of his name seemed to bring back memories of all the times they had accepted him before, but it was all again blotted out by the overwhelming realization that now he had become an alien to them. How he longed for their understanding and support, but knew it would not be forthcoming. Tears began to come to his eyes, and once again he felt alone. He had forgotten all about Evangelist. Suddenly he felt Evangelist's strong hand on his shoulder and turned around to face him again. Evangelist looked into Christian's eyes and spoke, and the way he spoke the words to Christian seemed to say to him that he too had one time been misunderstood and rejected and could relate perfectly to, and knew exactly what Christian must be feeling inside at that very moment. His voice denoted strength and encouraged Christian forward. Turning to face the end of the field that they were standing in, but in a gaze that seemed to look far beyond that place, Evangelist said,
Christian, do you see the wicket gate in the distance?
Christian strained his eyes to see, but could not see that far beyond the trees that were at the end of the grain field he was standing in. Over the years, his sight must have gotten worse, he thought to himself. So, in despair, and in a tone of disappointment and self-contempt, mixed with a little bit of unbelief, with eyes toward the ground, he said,
No, I'm afraid. I can't see the wicket gate. It is too far away.
Upon hearing these words, Evangelist put his strong right arm around Christian, and then pointed towards the trees, and in an encouraging way that said, I know you don't get it at the moment, but don't give up. Almost all at once, Christian was filled with new strength, as Evangelist continued,
Okay then, do you see the shining light?
Christian once again strained his eyes off towards the trees, and for a few moments thought he saw nothing at all. But then suddenly, and faintly just through the trees, he could see a small shimmering light. It would pulse for a few seconds, and then grow dim and almost invisible. But though he could only see it for a little while at a time, he was very encouraged. The idea that there was actually a way of escape, and that Evangelist was taking the time to help him see it, was such a comfort to Christian that he became very excited and said with his hand-shading eyes,
I think I do see it.
Evangelist then responded with a strong sense of affirmation and encouragement to Christian to keep looking at the light, and then pointing again that direction, as if to remind Christian of the importance of doing so. He said,
Good. Keep that light in view, and don't turn to the right or to the left. Just keep walking straight towards it, and you will come to a large castle gate with a huge wooden door. There in the middle of that door on the gate is a much smaller one, at which you will enter. Simply knock on that door, and it will be opened to you, and you will be told what you are to do next.
Christian, after hearing these words, was so excited. No longer would he have to endure the cruel torments of those who did not, and would not believe him, no matter how hard he tried. The way of escape had been made for him. Picking up his courage, he said thank you to his new friend, and began to run as fast as he could towards the edge of the trees. Suddenly, he could hear the voice of his wife cutting above everything and saying,
Christian, come back.
It echoed up the hill and threatened to pull him back. Then he heard the voice of his children as well saying,
Daddy, please don't go, please come back.
Again Christiana spoke with tears and trembling in her voice,
Husband, you need help. Please let us help you. You are not well. We love you. Come back.
At this, Christian could take it no longer, and put his fingers in his ears and began to shout so loudly it echoed through the field and into the surrounding area.
Life! Life! Eternal life!
Christian's eyes were fixed straight in front of him, and he never looked back as he ran towards the middle of the plain. He was determined to find freedom and to follow Evangelist's counsel, for here he truly found rest from all his fears. Pretty soon, even the neighbors had come out to see Christian run. Christian quickened his pace, and as he did, he suddenly heard 2 sets of footsteps getting closer. After a few minutes of strenuous running, he was starting to run out of breath and was feeling a pain in his side. Out of energy now, he began to slow down to allow his lungs a much-needed rest. Out of nowhere, he found himself being violently pulled backward by his shoulder, and at the same time heard a gruff voice behind him saying,
Christian, is that you? Slow down. It's hard to keep up with you running. Can you?
We?
Christian said out of breath as the other one chasing him got in front of him. He recognized the voice of the first. It was Christiana's brother Obstinate, and close behind him was Pliable. Christian responded,
Obstinate. Pliable. Why are you coming after me, neighbors?
To get you to change your mind and come back with us. You are hurting my sister horribly by running away like this. How can you be so self-centered? All you can think about is your own wants and needs. But what about hers? Come back with us. Christian!
At this, Christian continued,
There is no way I can do that. Do you not realize what city you are living in right now? You are living in a city that is destined to be destroyed. Those who choose to stay there are doomed to be destroyed with it. Worse than that, once they die, they will face judgment and a lake that burns with fire and will be burnt up, with neither root nor branch left. No, I cannot continue to stay there and risk my life now, and in the world to come, forfeit my eternal life. But you and Pliable don't have to be destroyed. You can choose to go on a journey with me to the celestial city.
Looking at Christian with skepticism and disbelief, Obstinate replied,
Let me get this straight. You want me and Pliable here to risk everything that we have here, to go to some imaginary place up in the sky, just to avoid some imaginary fate that doesn't exist. Pliable and I aren't that crazy. I can't believe you are leaving everything behind. Your wife, your children, your job. Do you think that I want to do the same? To leave all of the comforts of life behind and risk my life on a journey to absolutely nowhere? Why don't you have any sense in your head, Christian? What is so great that you would leave all of this behind for it?
I don't believe anything that I told you is fake. I trust the book I hold in my hand is true, because it has never been wrong before. You see, Obstinate and Pliable, I'm looking for an inheritance that is incorruptible, undefiled, and that does not fade away. The inheritance is stored up in heaven and kept safe there, to be given at the right time and to those who are diligently seeking it. You can read it if you want in the book that I hold in my hand.
Absolutely not. I want nothing to do with your book. I already told you that I didn't want anything to do with this book at work, and I have all the more reason not to have anything to do with it now. You've lost your ever-loving mind, Christian.
At this, he glared with hatred towards Christian and said,
I don't care about all the cotton candy nonsense that you are talking about. It's all a dream and a fairy tale. Are you going to go back with us or not?
No, I am not. For you see, I've already laid my hand to the plough. I'm not looking back.
After hearing Christian's response, Obstinate turned toward Pliable and in a tone that said there was no reason in the world why any sane person would continue to try and convince Christian to return, said,
Come on, Pliable, let's get back home and leave this lunatic behind. There's a group of these people that when they decide something, they are wiser in their own eyes than 7 men that can render a reason.
At this, Pliable backed slightly away from Obstinate and moved slowly towards Christian, but still looked at Obstinate, and with one hand outstretched pointing towards Christian said,
Don't make fun of him. If what Christian here says is true, then the things that he's after are far better than what we have now, and that's for sure. I don't have as good a paying job as you do, Obstinate, and I don't have a wife or children, so I really don't have as much to lose at this point. I think I'll go along with Christian to see if these things are true.
Obstinate could hear no more and said,
So you're just as out of your mind as he is, eh? Listen to what I'm saying and go back, Pliable. The only thing he is leading you to is insanity. You don't know where such a brain-sick fellow is going to lead you. Go back with me and be wise.
Christian was next to speak.
No, don't listen to him, Pliable. Please come along with me. The things that I have talked about earlier will not only be there, but there is much more than that. If you don't believe me, here.
At this, Christian reached out his hand that held his book and gently moved it towards Pliable. He looked at Pliable with pleading eyes, knowing what was at stake, and said,
Read them here in this book, and they are true. Behold, these things are all confirmed by the blood of the one who wrote it.
That's okay, Christian. Why don't you just read them for me? I don't need to search for myself when you can do that for me.
Pliable then turned to Obstinate, and with a convinced tone said,
Well, Obstinate, I've come to a decision, and I intend to go along with Christian, and what happens to him will happen to me.
Looking at Christian with a smile, and with a tone of excitement, Pliable said,
Do you know the way to this place you long to go to so much?
I've been told of that land by a farmer called Evangelist. He told me that there is a large gate with a small door in a larger door, and that when I knock at that door, I will be given further instructions on how to get there.
Okay then, good Christian. Let's get moving. From the sounds of what you are saying, it will be quite the journey.
As they continued walking forward, Obstinate slowly made his way back to the City of Destruction and disappeared out of sight. As he did so, the last thing Christian heard Obstinate say was,
I'm going back where I came from. I'm not going to join with a group of crazy people who are out of their minds.
No sooner had Obstinate left than Christian began to talk with Pliable.
Pliable, I am so happy that you decided to come along with me. If only Obstinate had taken the time to learn more about what was to come, I'm sure he would not have turned his back on us so easily. He just needed to take more time to weigh things out. He needed to understand the true value of the gift so graciously offered to him.
Well, Christian, since there is no one here but the two of us now, why don't you tell me more about the awesome things that we're going to enjoy when we get to where we're going?
I'm much better at thinking about them than trying to explain them with words. But since you are really wanting to know, I will read about them to you from my book.
Do you actually believe that what you are reading is true?
Yes, absolutely, because it was made by him that cannot lie.
Well, what things are they?
There is a kingdom that is all joy, love, and peace, and it will never ever end. We will be given everlasting life so we can live there and enjoy it forever. That means we will never have to say goodbye to anyone ever again.
Wow, this is amazing. Is there more?
There are glistening golden crowns and glory to be given to us, and garments that will make us shine like the sun of heaven.
This is very nice, and what else?
We won't ever be sad or discouraged again, for he that is owner of the place will wipe away all tears from our eyes.
And what kind of people will we be with there?
There we shall be with seraphims and cherubims, creatures that will dazzle your eyes to look on them. There you will also meet with thousands and 10,000s that have gone before us to that place, and none of them are cruel or unkind or sinful, but are loving and holy, each one walking in the sight of God and standing in his presence with acceptance forever. In a word, there we shall see the elders with their golden crowns, and there we shall see the holy virgins with their golden harps. We will even get to see men who by the world were cut in pieces, burnt in the flames, eaten by beasts, and drowned in the oceans, for the love that they had to the Lord of that place, all well, and clothed with everlasting life as with a garment. Just think about the conversations we shall get to have, and the things we will learn.
Hearing this is enough to ravish one's heart, but are we really going to enjoy these things? How do we get to be a part of all of this?
The Lord, the governor of that country, has recorded in this book, the summary of it being that if we are truly willing to have it, he will give it to us freely.
Well, my good companion, I'm very excited to hear this. We better hurry then, because the sooner we get there, the better, and let's pick up the pace.
I'm afraid I can't go as fast as you would like, because of this burden that is on my back.
After saying this, Christian turned to look at Pliable, to continue the conversation, but was not paying attention, and suddenly found himself tumbling through the air down a small 5-foot embankment. And because his arm was around Pliable, they both stumbled down the embankment and suddenly fell headfirst into a brown, soft, mud-filled swamp. Around them in the swamp were small bushes that had managed to grow along the surface of the muddy slough. Truly, Christian should have been minding his steps more, and if he had been more aware, and had done his research or had known anything about the area he and Pliable had been in, he would have been much more careful about things. For now, whether he realized it or not, they were in no small danger. The place they had fallen into had been the death of many a traveller, and for the very same reason, they were now in the swamp. Christian and Pliable were now fighting for their lives. On one side of the swamp was the city of destruction from which Christian and Pliable had come, and on the other was the faint glowing light that was now growing slightly stronger. Both men wanted out of the swamp, but each one had different exit points in mind. Pliable was all too eager to get to the side that was the shortest distance from where he was, and that would afford the least struggle, and indeed soon did manage to struggle back to the edge on the side of the city of destruction, and to grab an overhanging tree that had its roots sticking out of the dirt. Wrapping his mud-covered hands around the tree, he was able to get just enough of a hold to pull himself free from the mud. Once on the top of the small ledge, Pliable looked down at Christian and angrily said to him,
Where are you now, dear Christian? Where is this so-called celestial city you talk so much about? If this is what it's like at the start of our journey, then I can only imagine how it's going to be the rest of the way. And from the looks of it, you don't look like you're going much further yourself. If you know what's good for you.
And at this, Pliable cupped his hands over his mouth and yelled loudly,
You'll turn around now. Should you get out alive on the other side, and I say again, should you get out on the other side, you can enjoy the brave country without me.
With that, Pliable turned his back on Christian, ignoring his cries for help, and made his way back to the city of destruction without even once looking back. As Christian saw the fading form of his now so-called friend disappearing into the woods behind him, he himself, with renewed vigour, to get to the other side of the swamp. Ahead of him was another 20 feet of swamp, and here and there were trees with their wide moss-covered bases disappearing into the dark brown mud. Christian made his way slowly by trying to climb up on top of the surface of the mud with his hands and belly, as the surface was slightly harder than the mucky, dark black mud beneath. Each time his hands came out of the mud, they brought up with them the black muck to the surface. This went on for a good 15 to 20 minutes. Christian's arms were burning like fire now, and he felt like giving up more than ever. At last, he reached the far edge of the mire, but as he struggled to climb out, a sickening realization gripped him. He couldn't. Every time he tried to rise, the burden strapped to his back dragged him downward like a living weight determined to drown him in the filth. The bank before him was steep and slick, the mud clinging to his limbs like thick oil. Desperate, he reached for a tangle of roots jutting from the earth above. His fingers closed around one, gnarled and solid, but his hands were caked in sludge, and the root, worn smooth by time and rain, offered no grip. His palms slid off with a sickening slurp, and he fell back into the muck with a splash that soaked him to the chest. Gritting his teeth, he tried again, and again. On one attempt, he managed to wedge his foot into a shallow fold in the bank and latch both hands around a sturdier root. For a moment, it felt like he was gaining ground. His breath came in ragged gasps, his arms shook with effort, and the burden on his back seemed to strain against him like a creature resisting rescue. Just when he thought he might escape, there was a sharp crack. The root snapped under the pressure, and with a cry, he tumbled backward, the brown and black muck closing around him once more like a shroud. His mind began playing stories of what people would say to each other when they heard about him being lost forever. He thought of his children, and then Christiana. She would be heartbroken. He was just about to give up when a thought occurred to him.
You prayed before, when things were difficult at home and it helped. So why not pray now? Why not ask for help?
With this, Christian began to pray.
Please send me help, Celestial King. I'm not sure what to do. Without you, I'm going to die. Please save me.
Millie.